Hello, welcome to this month's drawing and painting tutorials. It's January and things are getting a lot colder around here, so there's a lot of snow around, and for that reason I'm going to focus this month's subject matter on painting and drawing snow, which can be extremely difficult. So we're going to begin by painting the snow in watercolor. So after you've picked out your references, use a piece of acetate to place over the top and experiment with making some changes to the composition. So for instance, in this piece we have a really strong diagonal line and two very strong vertical lines that are cutting the picture plane. And so what you find here is that your eye comes in, goes here, and bounces back and forth between these two really strong vertical lines. So let's try to diminish that a little bit. Let's see what would happen first of all if we cut down the length of these so that they aren't cutting the picture completely in half. I also think that I would like the composition to be, instead of 2 strong verticals, 3 verticals. So what if I painted this out? So if I pushed one over about here, and I had one that was about here, and then this one it's retreating in the distance, but it's still visible. Maybe I could make it even a little bit darker. I think I have a strong composition and I'm ready to move forward. So step number 2 is going to be preparing the picture for layout on your watercolor paper. So you can see what I've done here. I've laid the picture on top of a plain sheet of paper that will give me wide margins to mark on. Then measure the length and find the exact center, then a couple of other midway points, and mark those down. So I've divided the length into quarters. Do the same thing on the vertical axis, measuring the length, finding the half, put the same marks top and bottom, and make sure that they line up with each other vertically. Then use a piece of watercolor paper. So you just put that on your board. I use masking tape and make good clean borders. And the most important thing to watch is that the basic proportions of the finished painting stay the same as your reference material. Now use that same handy dandy ruler and find those exact same reference points that you used for the reference material. Then you get to start laying down big shapes. Let me just show you the basic process here. Here's my half point. And if I divide this space between half and B into quarters, then the bridge bisects the edge of the paper right at this first quarter mark. So then I would translate that to my paper here, first, second, third, and voila, my bridge is going to bisect the paper right there. Do the same thing over here. If I divide that space into thirds, then the top of the bridge bisects at that top third. So I have good marks there and there. The vertical line here is not quite to B, so I'll put a vague line, but I don't know the angle that it's supposed to be at. So to find the angle, I need to find the top of this line. So right here is the top of the bridge. Going back to my paper now, this is where those two lines intersect. So then it's just a simple matter to connect this point of intersection to where it cuts the paper, and there's the top of my bridge. So I'm going to use this grid system and transfer the entire drawing, including those changes that I made to the poles. And then step 2 is going to be to mask out the white areas. So I'm going to use some masking fluid, and once everything is sketched out on the paper, I'm going to protect the areas like this and this and this and this. And then I'm going to squeeze out a puddle and use either a stiff nylon brush or a toothbrush. Dip that in the masking fluid. And then I'm just going to fling the paint right over the top of the paper. Once again, this will be after I have done all of the drawing. I just want to show you the technique. You can also tap and that will give you different sized blobs. But you want some that are large and some that are small because that will give a sense of depth to your picture. So work like that for a while. Once the masking fluid is dry and we're ready to paint, then we can come back to it and I'll show you how to get started. Okay, when your painting is all prepared and the snow has been protected with Misket, then it's time to start painting. Now in a snow scene, not surprisingly, you're going to see a lot of white. But it's not paper white because we need to be able to distinguish the background white from the snowfall in the foreground. So I'm going to start by covering the whole thing with this kind of neutral gray tone. So let's try to mix up a gray that isn't too ugly. And the fastest way to make a nice smooth tone is to spray your surface with water, then use as big a brush as you can, a nice big flat. Actually, you want to see big? Booyah! 2 inches. You can use whatever you have, but use the biggest brush that you can for the area because that is how you're going to get the smoothest tone possible. Then, I'll just brush that right over the top. You don't want a solid color. That is boring. So for some of this I'm going to mix in a little bit more blue. For some of it I'm going to keep a little bit more yellow. And that doesn't mean that I'm mixing all those colors together. It just means that I'm going to put them down on the paper in a way that gives me a little bit of variation. Okay, that looks fantastic for a nice base. And when that's in place, let it dry. Okay, this is all nice and dry now. So let's move on now to put these trees in place. In order to make sure that you're matching your tones, make sure that you have plenty of test squares on hand. Get your possibility mixed up and then test that right up. Ooh, that's perfect. Look at that. First time out of the barrel. So then I'm just going to start to carefully fill in these tree shapes. And I'm using a flat brush to make the color a little bit smoother. And then see how when the branches get skinnier, the color should get a little bit less intense. And I'm seeing these shapes as large shapes. So this whole tree with all of its branches is one solid shape, and I don't want there to be any differentiation from one branch to the other. It's just a solid color. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera now and work on these tree branches, and then I'm going to come back to you when we're ready to push forward and do some other details. Okay, once you have those trees in place, then you can start working on the poles. So let's do the same thing that we did before. Get a test square and match the black. That's pretty good right there. Once you've matched the colors, you can just start to carefully add that detail to the pole. Just pay close attention to your reference material. You don't want a lot of solid colors because the color is being broken up by snowfall. You can add some texture easily by using a wadded up paper towel and stamping. Carefully slice in that outline, and then you can always drop in some more colors into that wet paint. So you see that there's a definite dark side and a light side on the pole. So I'm going to emphasize that after I filled it in by stamping that pattern, focusing on the right side. There. For those really skinny spots, I can switch to a rigger brush, and this is the way to put in the details on the metal bars and things like that. I'm going to do all 3 poles, so let me do some more work off camera. I'll come back to you. Now all the light posts are done, and we're going to move on to the bridge. So you can see that there's more detail visible and the contrast is sharper in the foreground than in the background. I'm going to start in the cloudy background and then move up. There, that's good. And then I'll stamp out a little texture here, just like I did in the light pole. Okay. So then it starts to get a little bit more detailed about here. So you can start to see some space in between the individual poles. I'll do a little bit of stamping, add a little bit of mottled color here by just dropping in some different colors. And then the top here, I've already used masking fluid to protect the snow, so I can just go straight over the top of the railing, and I'll throw in some darker color in the foreground. Now here, these poles in the foreground are really a solid dark. They're very, very black. So I'm using straight Payne's gray. Importantly, I'm putting them in as shapes, so big solid forms. So I'll work this way. I'll come back to it when we're ready to move on to the figures. Okay, here's what we've got so far. So I'm going to work on the couple now, and then I'm going to remove the misket and do the final touch-up work, and our painting of snow will be finished. Now the couple is the only thing in the piece that adds any color. We don't want to create targets, not even target focal points. The focal point needs to feel natural. So I want there to be a natural drawing towards the subject matter here, but nothing too contrasty that will bring you there right away and keep you there. So I'm going to choose my colors carefully. The figures are so small that there's just going to be the impression of faces here. They're standing back in the picture plane. They're supposed to be fairly small. Realistically, you just wouldn't be able to see very much. And the most important thing to pay attention to is the patterns of highlights and darks when you're painting so small. You really need to let the little shapes be lost and let the story be told through the largest shapes. So I'm not fiddling around with a lot of detail here. I'm just putting in what's absolutely necessary. Once the colors have a chance to dry on your figures, then you can go back and emphasize some of the shadow shapes. Just take your time, use a small brush, clean up the shapes. After you add a little bit, just wet your brush and soften that up a bit. Now when I'm done with the people and everything else is dry, then I'm going to take the time to remove that masking fluid. And the easiest way to remove masking fluid is with a rubber cement eraser. If you don't have one, then you can just use your finger. But if there's a lot of masking fluid like there is in this case, it's going to take a while. You could really wear it on your finger too. So invest in a rubber cement eraser. Okay, this is the painting after the misket has been removed. I'll just pan around here so you can see. So now all that is needed is last little touch-up things. So I have a little pot of some white paint, but then you can just take your little brush. You're gonna do some adding of snow here and there, wherever you want to add some. And you can also soften some hard edges. I use an angled shader, and I just come in and do some gentle softening like this, here and there, blot it, rinse, and go again. It takes a very long time, but this is the way you get those tiny, tiny little details. And it really is all about the details. The difference between a good painting and a great one comes down to those finicky details. Now maybe I want a few more flakes of paint, or maybe I want to brighten up this rail. I can do that easily using some white paint. I can just brush it on. And then again, as you retreat into the distance, you can't see that kind of detail anymore. So I just brush it away and then let it be. So I'm going to take some time off camera and finish it up to the very final stage. Then we'll take off the tape and I'll show you the finished painting. Alright, now here is the finished piece. So you could push it farther if you wanted, but you can see that it really does work as far as leading you into the picture plane, your eye goes to the couple, and then it's drawn upward with this vertical and over to this vertical. So it does a good job of getting you to circle all around the piece. So that is how you paint snow scenes, falling snow in watercolor. So next we're going to move on to drawing snow, which is a little bit trickier because you have to employ some different techniques. So I'll show you some of those next.